Standing tall in the Mississippi legislature today is a bill that's turning heads and raising eyebrows. Should men's reproduction be policed the same way as women? Welcome back to Beyond the Bill Number, where we break down laws making waves and sometimes making us laugh across the country. I'm your host, Sarah, and joining me today, as always, is my partner in legislative crime, Stephen.
Hey, everybody. Excited to dive into this one. It's, let's say, a real eye-opener.
Oh, it is more than that. But today we are tackling Mississippi State Senator Bradford Blackmon's Contraception Begins at Erection Act. Yes, Stephen, you heard that right. It's Senate Bill 2319, and it's got people talking, tweeting, and dare I say, blushing.
Yeah. It's one of those bills that sounds like it belongs in a stand-up routine, but here we are. It's legislative reality.
And before we kind of get into the nitty-gritty unpacking this bill, why it's proposed, all of the things about it, let's just set the stage. Stephen, can you give us a quick overview of what this bill is actually all about?
Absolutely. So SB 2319 is a provocative piece of legislation that makes it unlawful for somebody to, let's say, discharge genetic material without the intent to fertilize an embryo. So essentially, it's a satirical response to all the restrictive reproductive rights laws that we've seen post-Roe. So the penalties are no joke, though. $1,000 for the first offense, $5,000 for the second, and $10,000 for the third. That's an expensive discharge. And there are exemptions, though. If the purpose of the discharge is for, say, donating to a fertility clinic, or if contraception is used, then there's no offense.
I don't think I will ever hear the word discharge the same again after today. So basically, Mississippi is kind of flipping the script and asking, what if we legislated men's bodies the way that we legislate women's?
Exactly, yes. It's satire, but with a sharp point. And it's meant to get people talking about the double standards in reproductive health laws. So men obviously aren't usually the target of these laws. It's usually about regulating women's bodies, whereas this one, of course, is aimed very directly at the men.
Right. And it's not the first time we've seen kind of this type of satire legislation in general, and especially when it comes to looking at Roe v. Wade laws and just the intense legislation that is coming out trying to regulate women's bodies. And this one, I have to say, takes it to a different level. But how does this compare to Georgia's Pro-Birth Accountability Act, which we covered last year?
Yes, that's a good question, because there are certain similarities, but a lot of differences as well. So Georgia's Pro-Birth Accountability Act was introduced in 2023, and it was introduced in response to the Life Act, which passed the legislature in 2019. So the Life Act provided full legal recognition to unborn children and severely restricted abortion access in the state. So the Pro-Birth Accountability Act was focusing on the after effects of this. So the after effects of what would happen with all these forced births and unwanted births due to these sort of fairly restrictive abortion laws. So it was essentially holding the state financially responsible for the upkeep of all those new children that were being produced. So it's worth adding that the bill did fail, and quite spectacularly, as you might expect for a bill of this type in Georgia. But Mississippi's bill, on the other hand, sort of takes a very different approach. It's sort of more preemptive, shall we say. So rather than trying to sort of compensate people for the children that are born, this one was addressing what Senator Blackmon called the root cause of unplanned pregnancies, which, of course, is men who are irresponsible and don't use contraception.
You know, I was reading a tweet or thread or something the other day that was, nothing takes you out of a fantasy book faster than when a man drinks a contraceptive tonic, because we just don't see males using contraceptives very much these days, and it'll bring it right back into reality.
Absolutely. It's a complete stereotype, isn't it? That men are very unwilling to use any kind of contraception, in particular any kind of chemical contraception that they might actually have to take in case it has some sort of effect on their body.
Yes, you know, the chemical birth control is something that women are all too familiar with, and bad side effects all around. You know, it can make you really depressed, make you gain weight, make you break out. But because of these bills that we have, and that a lot of the onus usually falls on a woman for carrying a child, wanted or unwanted, women are taking birth control because they don't want to have a forced birth.
Absolutely. So Georgia's bill then is a financial accountability proposal. Mississippi's, though, is aimed squarely at highlighting really the absurdity of trying to regulate these reproductive activities in the first place.
Yeah, it's definitely catching some attention, and many thousands of Bill Track 50 users have actually viewed this bill. It sparked debates all across the nation. Why do you think this is resonating so much?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons for this, and it is tens of thousands of Build
Oh,
Track
wow.
50 users have read it in just a week or two. So it really has sort of sparked this sort of debate, this ongoing debate. And I think a number of reasons. One is that a lot of the legislation, particularly in this topic, is a little bit depressing, shall we say? And I think so. I think people are actually welcoming the fact that there's something that's got a little bit of humor in it. It's quite
Hmm.
amusing, but it's also, of course, making a very serious point in a very clever way, and it flips the narrative in such a way that it's sort of impossible to ignore. I mean, years and years we've seen these laws that control women's bodies, and this bill, by turning that scrutiny onto men,
Hmm.
is just a refreshing change. It's like a legislative mirror showing how absurd it is to regulate such deeply personal and intimate functions. But at the same time, it's cleverly addressing that basic inequality when it comes to unplanned pregnancies, which is sort of what you alluded to earlier, really, that while it takes two to tango when it comes to unsafe sex, it's generally the women who have to deal with the consequences and make the difficult choices. So why not, for a change, let's penalize the other party? Perhaps it would make men act with a little bit more foresight.
Yeah, exactly. And let's talk about kind of the broader public reaction. This bill seems to be as much about sparking conversation as it is about legislative change. And do you think it's achieving that goal?
Oh yes, absolutely. So the national attention it's garnered shows that it's succeeding as this tool for public discourse. Now, whether or not the bill passes, and let's be real here. I mean, it's wildly unlikely that this bill would pass, particularly in Mississippi. So, but it's already done its job by highlighting the inherent absurdity in trying to legislate bodily autonomy. And so it's a clever move on behalf of the legislator because he knew that it was very unlikely he could pass any realistic legislation in this area, being a Democrat. And so he's instead going the next best thing, which is, well, let's generate this debate and let's do it in an amusing way.
Yeah, and I wonder about the message that this sends about the general legislature. Like you said, he's not going to probably get anything passed that is going to enact protections for women. We've seen a lot of reports of really unsafe spaces that women are in because of these bans, because medical practitioners being afraid of treating a woman, whether they're having, a miscarriage or they're having, some serious health issues. And so what do you think about kind of the message that this sends? Like, I can't do really anything about it, so I may as well kind of throw some kerosene on the fire and see what we can do.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a good tactic. It's worked in the past. It depends what you mean by work, of course, because
Hmm.
I mean, it's not like the Mississippi legislature is now going to turn around and start passing bills that actually defend women in response. But but it's getting people talking and it's getting noticed. So by flipping this script, it forces people to confront the double standards and think critically about the broader implications of these laws. And it might possibly engage people who otherwise wouldn't have engaged with something like this. People
Hmm.
will stumble across it on their social media. They might read it in news reports and so on. And if the bill can make people pause and then reconsider their stance, or even just pay a little bit of attention for just a few minutes to reproductive rights issues, well, I mean, that's a win.
When I was reading this, I was thinking this is such a good bill to actually capture people's attention. And, as the two of us are pretty engaged in public policy and kind of what's
Mm.
going on, it's really easy for me to forget that most people are just doing their lives. They got a lot of other stuff going on. Like, they're not tracking these things. And I was just
Mm.
thinking to myself, if I was a man and I saw this, I would just think, what about the logistics of this bill? Or, like, let's talk about those or the lack thereof. I mean, this bill doesn't specify how violations would be detected or enforced. What's your take on that? That's kind of what my brain would go to if I was scrolling around and saw
Well,
this.
absolutely, and obviously the lack of sort of the logistics and the support is sort of part of the satire,
Mm.
because the lack of specifics really highlights how impractical it is to police such intimate matters. But we should try and help. We should try and be helpful here. Let's see if we can help the legislator in actually providing some of those details that are missing. So,
Okay.
what you could have, for example, is a police force, a
Okay.
special police force. Perhaps we could call them the Erection Police, or perhaps how about the Mississippi Agency for Legitimate Emissions Surveillance? MAILS would be the acronym, so I think that would work quite nicely. They could have a motto. Maybe their motto could be protecting Mississippi's future, one discharge at a time. So, I mean, I think that might work, but it is like the bill itself is saying. So, see how ridiculous this all sounds? So now think about how women feel when faced with similar laws.
Again, I will never hear discharge the same ever in my life. And I mean, that's one thing that this bill has done. It's really impacted me. But I think this kind of brings us to the broader question of what kinds of other biological functions might we end up legislating if we keep going down this road? And it does seem like we're kind of going more and more of trying to really control what people are doing. And it's really interesting to see even, the first couple weeks of the Trump administration and everything that's kind of been upended with this. And with this and so many other things, Medicaid was just canceled accidentally yesterday, maybe not accidentally, who knows? But I mean, it definitely seems like we're kind of going down a road right now, doesn't it?
Yes, exactly. I mean, it is a slippery slope with such things, isn't it? And the bill puts this into a stark perspective, really. It's a legislative what if that forces us to question the ethics and practicality of trying to control this personal autonomy. And only time will tell in terms of the kind of bills that will be introduced over the next 4 years, and in particular the next 2 years as the Republicans control the legislature as well, and obviously with a supportive president. We've already seen a lot of bills introduced in the House in this topic, sort of basically trying to flip the script back around to the Republican view of reproductive rights and so on. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting few years.
That it will. It will indeed. So, I guess final thoughts. What's the big takeaway from the Contraception Begins at Erection Act?
Well, it's a bold, satirical statement that challenges us to think about fairness, autonomy, and the absurdity of legislating reproductive health in this way. So, as we said, very unlikely to pass, but its real success lies in the conversations it sparked, the awareness it's raised. So, perhaps we measure the success of the bill by exactly how many people have read it.
Yes, okay. Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, thanks, Stephen, and thank you to all our listeners for joining us on this wild legislative ride. I'm sure we'll have much more to unpack this year. So don't forget to subscribe, share this episode, let us know your thoughts on Senate Bill 2319. Do you think that satire is enough to make a difference? Are you also traumatized by the word discharge now? We'd love to hear from you.
That's right. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and don't forget, sometimes the bill number is just the beginning.